Hello and welcome to the Wikimedia Foundation's Human Rights Amidst Rising Anti-LGBTQ Efforts online workshop. I'm from the Human Rights Team at the Foundation, and during this workshop, be walking you through some steps you can take to ensure you are more safe and secure online during a really unfortunate and unbelievable rise in anti-LGBTQ sentiment around the world. First, I want to briefly discuss some of the threats to the movement and what the Human Rights Team does and why we're here. In 2020, the foundation conducted a human rights impact assessment, which identified a lot of threats that were facing the movement. Some of these threats come from authoritarian regimes during a real rise in authoritarianism around the world and a subsequent decline in online freedom. Some more of these threats also come from democratic governments who are conducting having various regulations related to national security or trying to mitigate other online harms. On the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see some of the threats to the movement that we've identified. These are really important and serious threats to the future of the Wikimedia movement, and the foundation took the results of the impact assessment seriously, which resulted in the creation of a human rights team. And the Human Rights Team aims to improve the safety of individuals who are persecuted for their good faith participation in the Wikimedia movement. Yes, I read that right off the slide. But that's what we're here to do. And the Wikimedia movement is a global movement, and there's many different political contexts in which people live, and the foundation can't be everywhere. So one of the key pillars of how the Human Rights Team works is to develop global partnerships with international, national, regional, local human rights NGOs, advocates, legal teams, and so on, in order to be able to support individuals around the world who might be persecuted because they're part of the Wikimedia movement. We also have a human rights interest group, which is a way we connect with members of the community, and you're welcome to join. We have a meta page for the Human Rights Team that has more information, but it's a interest group where we have semi-regular meetings with members of the community to get a better sense of what's going on for them and what are the human rights threats that they might be facing, or what other ideas might they have, so that the foundation can better support them. We also conducted a lot of education and training and also online courses. We have some in the WikiLearn platform. And we also, of course, this is one of them here, this workshop. So we conduct education and training to help individuals in the movement feel safer and be safer. We work with global advocacy on the human rights policy, on implementation, and also on various other aspects of it. And we contribute to human rights due diligence that's conducted at the foundation on the various projects that are going on. So this is what, in a quick nutshell, what the Human Rights Team does the Wikimedia Foundation. You can email us if you would like to ever talk with us at talktohumanrights@wikimedia.org. Okay, so a little bit of a background now on what's going on with global LGBTQ plus rights. As a human rights professional, it's been extremely disheartening and really saddening for the entire team and myself to read about a lot of rollbacks of LGBTQ rights, a lot of challenges that are going on around the world. There's been a lot of progress over the past 20, 30 years. It's certainly in my lifetime. It's been remarkable and inspiring. We can see here at least out of 56 out of 175 countries, had an increase in LGBTQ plus acceptance, but at the same time, nearly an equal number also experienced a decline, and 62 countries stayed roughly the same. Globally, in North America in 2022, in the United States, lawmakers proposed over 200 bills to limit the rights of LGBTQ Americans. In Canada, anti-hate experts are really concerned in a rise of online harassment and threats and persecution of LGBTQ plus individuals, and online events and offline events that are associated with online activities, which it's it's a global issue. This is not something that's confined to global South or global North. In Latin America, Human Rights Watch interviewed individuals from the Northern Triangle who described a real complex web of violence, discrimination, harassment that is really threatening the way their right to live healthy and happy lives, and has unfortunately resulted in many of them having to flee their countries. And it's really hard to leave your country, leave everything you've known, who you are, your friends, your support networks, the places that are meaningful to you, the people that are meaningful to you. um, and this is happening around the world. uh, During the COVID-19 pandemic in Asia, online hate speech and violence against LGBTQ plus people really increased in Asia, especially including in Malaysia and Indonesia. It became increasingly an everyday reality for LGBTQ plus individuals in Southeast Asia while navigating online spaces. And this is also not something, the online harassment isn't something that's limited to Asia or Canada or Latin America. It truly is a global phenomenon, and it can be transnational, where you can be harassed for by somebody from a completely other country simply because you've visibly somehow identified as LGBTQ plus on social media. Geographic breakdown, it's important to keep in mind that while this is occurring in countries, it's also unfortunately transnational. In Africa, there has been a real rise also in legal efforts to attack the LGBTQ plus community. We see in Kenya, Ghana, Senegal, Uganda, and Tanzania, there's been an increase actually in physical and online threats over just the past 3 months. And unfortunately, in the Middle East, there have been governments across the region are targeting the LGBTQ plus community. Some governments actually have used online dating apps to be able to identify who might be LGBTQ plus, and then harass them or subject them to public shaming and so on. And in Europe, there's been an increase in rights violations for LGBTQ plus individuals in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in North Macedonia. And there's been widespread disinformation campaigns across the EU. And just as I mentioned earlier, also this really tragic increase in online hate speech, online harassment, and intimidation. We often go online to feel, in a way, for many people, more ourselves. We can be in a space where we can engage more freely, ask questions, do research that we're curious about, and generally explore parts of ourselves and parts of our experience which we might not feel comfortable doing offline. And so when we see the online space closing to that, we also are losing an important part of ourselves, that part of ourselves that explores privately, explores anonymously. And so the closing of online spaces and the restriction of online spaces to LGBTQ plus individuals around the world is an enormously problematic, also from the individual perspective on how one lives one's life. But so how do these threats that we're talking about here actually manifest in the Wikimedia movement? Excuse me. You know, the internet, a while ago, people used to talk about, on my online, my offline life. But as most of us know now, that line has increasingly blurred. There's very little distinction between what is online or offline. We do so much of our life online, sharing photos, paying people back, sharing stories, taking our classes, getting degrees, and as a Wikimedia member of the Wikimedia movement, contributing to the world's knowledge on such a really important project. But as a result of that sharing and collaborating and working and connecting online, we're putting more information out there, and this information becomes pretty easily accessible and can open up many people to these harms that we've talked about, such harassment, stalking, bullying, impersonation, swatting, hate speech, and doxing. And doxing is extremely dangerous part of this. Excuse me. Which is where your personal information, like your home address or your work address or phone number, so on, is shared online as a way to intimidate you. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about harassment and cyberbullying here. These kind of harms typically manifest, in threats of violence, whether they're online threats of violence, which would be like, for example, hacking or, posting obscene or hateful, mean things to your social media accounts, or personally emailing you, trying to impersonate others, or you to harass you, creating sock puppets on Wiki, gender-based or sexuality-based insults, racist, xenophobic, homophobic comments, and so on. And these manifest online, and they can also manifest, through SMS, through WhatsApp, Telegram, Facebook groups, wherever, because Wikimedia community, as you all know, doesn't just communicate on Wiki. It communicates through a variety of channels. And we have seen that this can appear, on Wiki, it can appear on social media, it can appear in private channels everywhere. So it's important to keep that in mind, that when we're talking about, safety and security here, it's not just what happens on Wiki, but also what happens off Wiki. As I mentioned briefly earlier, doxing is a particularly problematic and nefarious issue because first of all, it's an extreme breach of your privacy. It's a type of a digital abuse. And so what they'll do is they basically they conduct an immense amount of research. And also, what a waste of time that these individuals are actually doing this. But nonetheless, they do this incredibly, and they'll spend an enormous amount of time trying to find out exactly who you are. And then using whether online resources or potentially offline resources in the case of really nefarious individuals who have connections in law enforcement or other parts of the government, to be able to find out very personal information about you and put it online. And this is a way to intimidate you, harass you, to basically get you to shut up and to go offline. And we have also seen this happening to LGBTQ plus individuals around the world, with the idea being to make them feel very unsafe in their homes, and to encourage them to leave the platform. And it's quite an unfortunately easy thing to do. Many of us we use our real names on Wiki, or we have personally identifiable information on our user pages. So it's not too hard for somebody who's motivated by hate and has nothing else to do to actually find the information out about you. Okay, so there's these threats. We've talked about some of them. And so how can you actually protect yourself in the midst of these rising threats? Um, as I talked a bit in the beginning, these technologies are really amazing. When I was a teenager, I first got a computer, and it came with a free encyclopedia on CD-ROM, not online. And I was just spend so much time going through this stuff. I even didn't go on dates, because I'm just so addicted to this encyclopedia. So when I got older, and of course when Wikipedia came online, oh my goodness, this was heaven on earth, because this was so much to explore. It's my point is and to go down the rabbit hole with Wikipedia, as you all know. But my point is that these technologies are extremely powerful in a very positive sense. But with any technology as it emerges, there's multiple ways it can be used, and it will inevitably include ways in which it can be used, in a bad way, in a negative way. So the technologies that we have that are out there, they carry this positive side and they carry this negative side. And unfortunately, a lot of emphasis in the Wikimedia movement has been on the positive side, and this is really great. You don't have a Wikimedia movement. You don't create this incredible encyclopedia, incredible resource, unless you view the technology positively. But that can tend to blind us from the negative side of things, and that's not to take away from the positive side, but for us to be mindful of the negative side and take steps that we can to limit how harmful that side can be. So to protect yourself against harassment and bullying, and I just want to make a mention here before we get started. The Human Rights Team will be publishing some blog posts quite soon, and today is April 11th, and we'll be publishing quite soon, in 2023. I don't know when you'll be watching this, but anyway, we'll be publishing some blog posts that have to deal with ways to mitigate doxing and other harassment as well, as an addition to this. So just to be mindful, and of course that this will be announced, and you'll be able to find that online too. So if you're being harassed by somebody online, consider asking some of these, what we call, like, red flag questions. Do you think that this person might know where you live or know other personal details about you? For example, have you been in, let's say, Telegram channels or Signal groups where you've chatted and maybe shared what city you're in, or even what neighborhood stores you shop at? Have they made threatening comments? Are there threats specific? Now, the specific is important because somebody can make quite generic threats, and of course, that's very scary. I myself have received these kind of threats in the past, but it's the ones that are very specific, which might indicate that this person might be closer to you than you think or have access to information about you. And these are the ones particularly to be mindful of. Are their claims, irrational or erratic? Do they have a history of online violent behavior that you are aware of? So those are some questions. I'm sorry, I'll go back just to finish that up before we get into doxing. So these are some questions to be mindful of to help you understand and sort of take control of the risk that is coming, the information that's coming to you. Because sometimes we might receive a threat and it can make us feel really scared. But then when we look at the threat, we can see, although it's scary, that there's not much likelihood that this is anything that's real. That's really, there's a real threat here, offline threat, if you will. So it's why it's important to take a look at some of this information and use these questions to see, is this a very credible threat, or is unfortunately an extremely toxic person? And when we have a sense of control over the threats or the feelings that we have, then we're actually able to take more effective action, which might be, you know, limiting information or so on, contacting law enforcement. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. As I mentioned earlier, doxing is, to my mind, an extremely dangerous and worrisome, and it's very scary threat. Um, so we'll be publishing, as I mentioned earlier, a blog post about doxing. And one of the best things you can do, if this is of concern, if you are concerned that your information is out there and that it might be shared, or somebody might be able to connect the dots, or you've gotten one of those notifications that your data was part of some data breach in the past. Many of these companies get hacked and then the information gets out there, and it's not, you can buy this data on the black market very cheap, for $100, 100 euros, around that, for access to some of this data. And then the information could be found in that way. It's really, really quite good for you to to conduct Google and Bing and other search engines, DuckDuckGo or whatever you might use, searches to be able to see on your real name, on your username that you use online on Wiki or on other social media platforms, on perhaps some nicknames that you might have. And this includes stuff you made when you were a teenager or a kid, which oftentimes that can come back to bite us, so to speak. And seeing what's out there, doing a Google image search on any images you might have contributed to comments or pictures of yourself, and getting a sense, of what you have out there. And in that way, you can contact some of the websites to ask the content to be removed. I remember when my father passed away, I was concerned that his information would be used, because it can be a common scam. His information can be used to create open fake bank accounts and credit accounts. So I did this type of exact approach and went through and found lots of information about him. And he was a person who wasn't very online, really. But nonetheless, the stuff was out there, and I was able to, it was really took a while, but contact each website and get that information removed. And now there's nothing, which is, I figure, also a way I can honor him too. But for us who are here, doing this is also really important for taking control of our information out there. And even if you've done it once, it's really good to go through periodically. I still periodically would do a search for information about my father, and sometimes stuff still pops up. So phishing is something that we didn't really talk about before, and phishing is also particularly dangerous. Phishing is when you get an email or like an SMS message or a message, on WhatsApp or another online group, which tries to entice you into downloading a file or clicking on a link, which can then install malicious software known as malware on your computer. And so phishing will often will often be framed or look like it's from somebody or about something you're interested in, or something resonant for you. You might get an email. Let's say you've participated in a lot of various wiki events, right? And you might then get an email that might invite you to a new wiki event. And this, it'll say something like, possibly, I'm just, making this up, that you can, we'd love to invite you to this event, and please, fill out this form so we can pay, have your accommodations ready. But actually, when you download that form, it actually contains malware on it that then installs on your computer and tracks everything you do and sends it off to some other third party. So it's important, as we talked about with the doxing earlier, to be mindful of the information that's out there about you online, because then people can use that information to actually craft a more convincing uh, letter for you, or email, or message, or whatever it might be for you, right? So see, it doesn't mean to go and erase everything. If you're participating in these events and you have a username that's not your real name and so on, that's fine. But, and of course, it's really wonderful when we share our achievements and our accomplishments. But just knowing that that's out there, and that sounds too good to be true, just might be, is really worthwhile. And double checking the email addresses that they're from, not downloading files from unknown sources. If you do need to download it, uh, open the document, like if it's a PDF or a Word document, Microsoft Word document or LibreOffice document or whatever it might be. Open it in, like, for example, Gmail, because it has the the online actually viewer inside Gmail. For instance, you can save the file to your drive there, and then open it in the Google Drive, for example, and then open it in Google Drive. If you don't have a Gmail account for various reasons or ideological reasons, related to the company's use of data, I still would encourage you to create an account that you would just use for these purposes. If there's something you're not feeling, you're kind of skeptical about opening, you'd rather just use the Google Drive just to do that. That's a great feature that Google does have. Other ways of keeping safe. It's an unfortunate reality, but that we need to think twice about what we post, what we share, what we like, or what we comment on online, because we start to build sort of digital footprints. This is why I think it's we often think of these things in a human scale, but sophisticated actors can employ AI systems, machine learning systems, and other sophisticated approaches to be able to find out, what are the the tweets you've liked on Twitter, for example. It's not too difficult to find that stuff out. So, and that can give clues to how you might get phished, or that might give a clue into how to dox you. For example, if you're on Twitter or Facebook, and you like a lot of very, very specifically local pages, let's say, or follow very specifically local Twitter accounts, it's wonderful, right? I enjoy that too. Yeah, it's important to know what's going on in your community, but that also gives a clue to where you are. So it's not to not do that, but to be mindful of what you're following, right? Um, Posting very personal information, such as a birth date, such as a maiden name, you know, the names of your parents, that can also be stuff that can be used against you. Ensure that your phone number is nowhere online, or if you do need to have something like that, you can purchase a phone number from like Google or Skype for a very low cost. I believe that for Skype you can have a phone number for less than 50 euros a year. And on social networks, and that includes LinkedIn or professional networks, be mindful to accept friend requests or contact requests from people or that you know of. It's a increasingly common tactic to use, for example, LinkedIn and other professional networks to be able to infiltrate and harass people's social networks. And if you have not done so, you can also limit the kind of content you're tagged in social media. You can also set it so that you have to manually approve every tag, so that you cannot be tagged in something without your consent. And that's a really, really important way to actually address some of the concerns that can come from just being tagged in things that you might not want to be tagged in. And it can put your friends at risk of harassment as well, because now they're associated with you. So in addition, if you're posting photographs of your home or selfies, be mindful of what the background is and anything that's really identifiable that could indicate its location. You would be genuinely surprised at the efforts people go through to be able to identify where people are located. In fact, there was a case that was recently out of Japan where an individual had posted a selfie and they were wearing glasses, and somebody used the reflection in the glasses, a stalker, to be able to find out where they were located. Incredible, right? So these, you don't know who's out there, and it's not to not take selfies or not to enjoy digital life, but be mindful of these things. If you've not spent time going through your privacy settings of your social media apps, of your phone, I really encourage you to take some time, set aside an hour or two, and just go through it and be sure everything is set the way you like. A real plus side of the past few years has been a lot of pressure from civil society on pushing social media companies to include an enormous amount of privacy control. So take advantage of that. That's been done to help protect people around the world. I would strongly recommend also deactivating geolocation on your accounts unless it's particularly relevant. These can be used to identify where you are. They can also be used to identify patterns in your daily life where you might go. If every day around 12 you post a selfie at a cafe, that might give an indication to where you might be every day at 12. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the background of videos and photos before publishing them, just double check them to be sure you're comfortable with them. It's okay for you. And then I also encourage you to report suspicious or threatening accounts to the social media platforms. And also, if things are happening to you on Wiki, to report them to the Human Rights Team at talktohumanrights@wikimedia.org. That's talk to, which is the word to, human rights at wikimedia.org. So, I would also might be, in terms of more wiki specific ways to address some of these issues, consider developing a secondary account, especially if your primary account, your main account, might be easily identifiable, or if you attend events in person. This might be if you're, in a situation, let's say you're passionate about political topics, but you've got a main account where you work a lot, let's say on, plants and animals in your country or your region. You might want to separate the two and have an account that works on political, which is not connected to that one. And also to be mindful that it is not too hard for people to be able to figure out who you are from the kind of edits you make, because we tend to edit the things that we know. Many people often start with stuff about the city they know or places they've lived. As the slide says here, which is really true, if you are vulnerable, be boring. And that's quite radical to be boring in a world that really wants us to not be so boring, but it can actually be a very wise way to be online. So having to build on this more, having a Wikimedia only email address for correspondence, which is not tied to your identity, is an extremely good idea. Separating your Wikimedia activities in that way. If you are going to meet people in person, this is something I would really recommend you to think quite carefully about, especially close to home. If there's a chance to meet, for example, in a bigger city, in a public location, or someplace a bit quite far away, I think that's a really wise thing to do. You don't, and it might not be that the person that you are meeting has any particular nefarious, purposes, but you don't know who they talk with. And this is where we've often seen people quite innocently share information about where vulnerable members of the movement are located, and it can cause problems for them. So, actions. Actions that the Wikimedia Foundation can take are dictated by our global policies, but information is bounded only by safety and legal concerns. So it's really, really extremely helpful to us. As I mentioned earlier, we like to listen to the community. We very much believe in a quote unquote bottoms up approach, a community up approach. So and we view this engagement with the LGBTQ plus community as a long-term engagement because of, unfortunately, the persistent global threats that are out there. So having any advice, any wisdom, any opportunities to work together that you might have would be extremely, appreciated. And we won't attribute, we aren't going to publicly name you or attribute any tips or advice to you, unless we have a conversation. This is something you're generally interested in.